Alors, pour ce qui est du débat, tout le monde est bien entendu convié à intervenir. La seule règle, il y a une règle, n'importe qui peut intervenir, il y a une seule règle, c'est de contribuer à alimenter la question en cours. Juste évitons d'utiliser ça comme une tribune, juste pour dire, voilà, moi je viens d'ici et c'est bien ce qu'on fait, vous voyez. Le but, c'est d'avoir une vraie discussion de contenu et pas de faire valoir des positions. Voilà. Donc, il y avait deux thèmes qui me paraissaient, deux sujets qui me paraissaient intéressants, mais il peut y en avoir d'autres. Hein. Un premier qui était la phrase prononcée au début par Christopher Bryant et Antonia, qui était « on ne peut pas séparer agriculture urbaine et agriculture périurbaine ». Et pourtant, dans les espaces périurbains, qui sont, il faut le rappeler également, des espaces anciennement agricoles où on a également une agriculture intensive, il y a quelques difficultés à ne pas faire certaines différences, me semble-t-il, dans la mesure où on n'est pas dans des configurations qui sont les mêmes, ne serait-ce, pour reprendre l'expression de Pierre Donadieu tout à l'heure, en termes de foncier. Voilà. Ensuite, pour la deuxième session, il y avait quelque chose qui était intéressant, je trouve. Beaucoup de choses étaient intéressantes, mais pour démarrer une discussion, et que ça colle au reste, sur le type de production. Toutes les villes ne produisent pas le même type d'agriculture urbaine. Et finalement, ça influe sans doute en retour sur la ville elle-même, son organisation. Il y a un effet aller-retour là-dedans, assez culturel. Et je pense que ce serait intéressant, et pas seulement anecdotique. Hein, il ne s'agit pas simplement de 3 tomates sur un balcon. Ça va bien au-delà. Et je pense que c'est un sujet intéressant. D'ailleurs, sur ce sujet, Colin avait des choses à dire puisqu'elle travaille sur ces mises au marché. Voilà. Mais durant le débat, à un moment donné, hein, pour 5 minutes. Et puis après, là, sur ce que tu disais... Evelyne, troisième question qui, à mon avis, pourrait être intéressante, c'est on se rend bien compte que les termes utilisés, et donc derrière les termes, il y a les notions, diffèrent selon les pays, selon les endroits, de manière assez importante. Comment est-ce que l'on pourrait trouver un outil de comparaison pour essayer de mettre tout ça en perspective ? Il n'y a pas de réponse immédiate, mais je pense que c'est une vraie question parce que du coup, si quelqu'un travaille aux États-Unis, au Canada, en France, en Allemagne, eh bien, on parle de choses finalement, on a l'impression qu'on parle de la même chose et c'est des choses assez différentes. On est typiquement dans quelque chose qui relève de l'objet frontière, dans lequel on a une perception de ce qu'est l'agriculture urbaine. Tout le monde est d'accord là-dessus. Quand on rentre dans les détails, on se rend quand même compte que c'est pas exactement pareil partout. Voilà. Et en particulier, si je prends 2 éléments importants, me semble-t-il, 3 éléments qui influent sur cette définition de ce qu'est l'agriculture urbaine, il y a le contexte politique local, bien sûr, il y a le foncier, la valeur du sol, les usages, etc., propriété, les régimes de propriété qui sont également importants, et il y a le background culturel, il y a la manière dont cette agriculture s'insère dans un endroit. Évidemment, quand on est en train de faire une agriculture d'interstice, de subsistance au fin fond de l'Afrique, on n'est pas dans la même configuration que lorsque l'on fait un jardin communautaire aux Pays-Bas ou en Allemagne ou en France pour essentiellement avoir un peu de lien social et un peu de verdure près de chez soi. Voilà. Donc je pense que ces 3 sujets sont des sujets assez polémiques qui peuvent ouvrir à débat. On a 1 heure pour ça. Donc, moi, maintenant, j'ai lancé ça, je vais me taire. Et ça va être compliqué parce qu'au début, je sais que dans ces cas-là, ça prend un peu de temps pour démarrer. Mais la seule chose, je disais, on évite les tribunes et on évite la monopolisation de parole. Voilà. Et chacun peut intervenir sur ces sujets-là ou sur d'autres pour essayer de développer la discussion et de faire une synthèse un petit peu de ce qu'on a vu ce matin. Voilà, c'est ouvert. Oui, vas-y, appuie sur le bourrier.
Enfin, moi, je veux bien commencer avec la différence que tu dis entre agriculture urbaine et agriculture périurbaine ou agriculture en général. En fait, et elle est effectivement culturelle, parce que ce n'est pas du tout le cas pour notamment tous les pays africains ou en développement. Mais on a une origine qui est complètement différente, et dans la présentation d'Evelyne, on l'a bien vu, l'agriculture urbaine, en Europe ou aux États-Unis, elle est soit sociale, soit esthétique. Sociale, c'est les jardins familiaux, c'est une agriculture de production de subsistance. Esthétique, c'est la guérilla urbaine. Et là, on est du côté du cadre de vie, quoi. Alors que ce qui va fonder l'agriculture en dehors des limites de la ville, enfin son origine en tout cas, c'est pas du tout ça. On est effectivement dans la production, dans l'exploitation, dans un système marchand. Et moi, j'ai quand même l'impression que ces représentations, ou en tout cas ces origines, elles sont encore très fortement ancrées, et ce qui fait que amener un système agricole en ville, c'est quelque chose qui est compliqué, quoi.
What I'd like to say, it has to do with the difference between urban and peri-urban agriculture. And in fact, when you start looking at cities in different parts of the world and urban agglomerations, you can have totally productivist, capitalist enterprises in the city, in an agglomeration, and you can have social organizations producing food for relatively poor segments of the population. We've got that in Montreal, for instance, already in the Senneville example. And one of the ways of undertaking just an analysis, this is not action research, one of the ways of undertaking an analysis, there are a number of conceptual frameworks that have already been developed over the last 60 years, starting with 60, 70 years, with Louis Malassi in his book in 1955, where he talks about l'économie des exploitations agricoles, the economy of farm businesses. In fact, they're not just farm businesses. They're all sorts of things. They can be totally socially oriented. They can link the production of food products with other functions, which you call market functions. For instance, selling food produce on the farm, but by attracting people from the city to come and visit the farm, take a ride on horses and carts around the orchards and this sort of thing. We've got those sorts of things around Toronto and around Montreal. I mean, it's common, and it's common in other parts of the world as well. So basically, just undertaking an analysis of the range of different production systems, the motivations, and we can develop a conceptual framework easily to identify the different components that we need to analyze, as well as the environment, both the physical environment and the regulatory environment. And then we find that in the urban fringe, yes, there are areas that are made up of large-scale, highly productive, productivist, capitalist types of farming, and there are also all sorts of other types of farming. You know, smaller scale, often intensive, but they're set up to link in with. They have some social and environmental orientations, and then we have some large-scale farms, like the Ferme de Galie that Pierre noted, that is actually, it's very large, and in terms of intensive production, but it has I know the owner, one of the owners of the farm fairly well. I spent even a couple of nights with him and his family 2 or 3 years ago, and they have very strong social orientation in their farming. Even to the point of giving little lectures or workshops to kids on qu'est-ce que c'est la bonne bouffe, what's good food, and it's part of marketing, but it's also social and it's also environmental. So it's all mixed up. So it's not impossible to do this because we've got the conceptual frameworks. All we need to do is to merge a couple of the ones that already exist. And we can then see that within urban areas, urban agglomerations, you've got a huge range of different business or production types. What we used, the term was producteur d'alimentation. That included gardens and community gardens and family gardens and that sort of thing. So I think that's very important, and it's very important to recognize this heterogeneity of farm systems or food production systems, because if you want to try and influence them, you have to know what they're doing. You have to know why they're doing. You can't regulate it.
Okay.
These are things that most of the time that you just can't regulate. The best things happen when people are not regulated, and some of the worst things do too.
Okay, I think it would be great to have a real discussion, debate here. I mean, just meeting the questions and trying to answer and, I don't know, making arguments, see? Instead of just saying, okay, that's what I think and that's it, you know? So maybe we can keep on moving. Okay, so I think you wanted to tell us something about your own research. No?
I can, but I have comments about this.
And comments, and yeah, all this kind of stuff. It's up to you.
Okay, hi. So thank you so much for the presentations. They were very, very fascinating. So the things that I was thinking about, especially after Francois was talking about the question you sort of posed at the beginning about this idea of the types of peri-urban or urban agriculture and the specificities between place and production. This idea was, rolling around in my head as I'm listening to the talks. And so the first two people that have started here at the debate also were talking about this, the importance of context and the importance of the aims of the people that are doing this kind of production. So in the US or North American context versus Europe versus elsewhere, maybe developing countries that are also experiencing urbanization, but the political and economic context is quite different. So we have to think about what the situation is that urban agriculture is positioned in. So these different places have different constraints and also different opportunities. So we've mentioned regulation, we've mentioned tradition, and this can be tradition around what kinds of production is occurring. It can also be traditions around what kinds of foods are seen as being valued. This can be different views on private property rights or land tenure. These can be related to infrastructure, and this can be infrastructure, actual physical infrastructure, or also infrastructure related to the marketing and sale of different kinds of products. There might also be public conceptions around utility and the value of having localized production. So we have a globalized food system now, so in many places people are eating food that's coming from much farther away from where they live, which has not always been the case. So as people begin to desire to have that localized production, then the kinds of systems of support that are available also change. So then I liked what Evelyn was talking about, this idea of action and how the behaviors that people have influence there's this iterative cycle between the behaviors that people have and the preferences that people have and how that relates to the policy decisions that are made about that as well. And this idea also of collective action and what kinds of activities people will do to mobilize their own preferences. So you talked about guerrilla gardening, for example, which if anyone's heard of Ron Finley in East LA in California, this idea of people taking taking control of their own landscapes and their own spaces in a subversive but also extremely proactive way. Unused plots in urban areas that are utilized in such a way to increase that local production and also to empower the local population to produce their own food and to become politically active through the act of creating food. So this was a really important point I think she brought up. So also, this idea about protecting rural places and farmland while also simultaneously trying to build sustainable cities. So how are these two goals compatible? They sound as though they're compatible, but also how are they incompatible? What does that mean to say you want to protect and preserve rural places or production for the aims of urban people? Do you see how there could be a conflict between the idea that there's an imposition of the urban ideal into rural places, which it may seem that that's at the benefit of rural people, but perhaps that is seen as an actual imposition, as a imperial project, so to speak. But there can also be many opportunities for this around rural places that may feel that their economies are struggling and they are trying to find different ways to increase their own capacity, and having these linkages and these partnerships among urban people that are thus trying to relocalize their food systems. There are many opportunities there, but I think it's important to pay attention to how those opportunities can also be extractive, let's say. And also, so I've just been rereading Richard Walker's book, The Country and the City, with some of my grad students. And so I was sitting here thinking about the, so somebody mentioned rural places at risk of urbanization, but also capitalizing on the benefits of the urbanization of rural places, but then also this idea of the ruralization of the urban. So what does it mean when we talk about agriculture coming into cities, and what are the aims? Someone over here was talking about the motivations behind different kinds of production and where that production is located. So there's a dual process going on where you're having urbanization on the countryside, or at least pressures for urbanization on the countryside, but you also have the counter effect where in cities people are desiring those, what would be considered kind of a rural experience by bringing agriculture into cities. So, urban agriculture or urban gardening is about this idea of producing fruits and vegetables and animals, actual food products within the cities or close by to cities. And so, as other people have mentioned, there are different forms of this and also different goals. So a trinity of goals for this are the idea of commercial production, subsistence production, where the goal is to actually just produce food that's consumed, and also this sociocultural or recreational element. This was something that was running through many of the talks. And so that final one, this kind of idea of sociocultural or recreation and leisure landscapes, this is something that my own particular research is closely linked to. But so this idea of the role of food and agriculture and food production in recreation and the amenity values of both rural and urban places, I could bore you with descriptions of all the things I do, but perhaps we'll just talk about it later if you're curious. But I think this idea of the shift from production to consumption landscapes is important here. At what point does the production of the food also become a production of a landscape that urban people are consuming rural landscapes, consuming in the ideological sense? And how does that play into the policies and regulation of place in rural places? And then I'll stop here in just one moment. But one thing I noticed that was not mentioned, so I said commercial, subsistence, and recreational uses. That's what many people were talking about. What was not mentioned was the actual ecological element of agriculture, the actual ecosystem services that are a part of this idea of producing food and having green spaces within cities, okay? So the ecological contributions of urban and peri-urban agriculture. So I guess the question that I will present here and that we can carry on the debate is, what other functions can urban agriculture serve? So this can be the production of food in like truly, quote, urban places, or also those places that are along that interface or along that edge. But if we want to think broadly about the sustainability of food production in and around cities, I think we need to think about the variety of opportunities and services that can serve at multiple levels. So.
Thank you, Colin. Quite interesting. Well, a lot of things you were speaking about that were not presented during this first session. It's normal because we still have 2 other sessions, you know, especially about ecosystem services and biodiversity and so on, and landscape. You'll see that this afternoon. Now, en français, I switch. Donc oui, ce qui est frappant là-dedans, avant de passer la parole pour la suite et pour essayer de créer un peu de polémique, c'est que dans ce que tu as présenté, il y avait un peu les effets pervers également d'une agriculture urbaine présentée de manière extrêmement toujours positive. Il n'y avait pas que ça, mais il y avait ça aussi. Avec des vraies questions sur les objectifs réels de l'agriculture urbaine, sur la manière dont elle est imposée, un peu comme l'étalement est imposé dans l'autre sens. Je trouve que c'est une vraie question. Est-ce que les gens qui se retrouvent avec ces dispositifs les désirent vraiment et dans quel contexte? Et sur la manière dont ces nouveaux paysages sont consommés, à la manière dont on peut consommer un iPhone ou autre chose, et des rapports que ça... ce que ça dit du rapport de la personne ou d'une société à la ville dans laquelle elle se trouve. Je pense que c'est des questions qui sont polémiques et qui sont intéressantes, vraiment. J'aimerais qu'on les développe. Alors, il y a 3 prises de parole qui sont déjà prévues. Massimo, premier, Evelyne après, et Vincent en 3e. Je ne sais pas s'il y a d'autres personnes qui veulent encore intervenir. Oui, ok. D'accord, ben voilà, on peut commencer par Massimo.
How do you want? It's very short, my question. Today, the excellent presentation are directed to highlight behavior, best practices, action, and you say that, and I am agree with you, that usually for the definition is more easy and to talk about action than definition, okay. But, Christopher Bryant said that the best happened with the spontaneity and not with the rules. But we have to insert these best practices, action, project, local project, behavior, in the strategic plan, in the planning. This is the way for if we want to have ecological solution, because if we want to have a good virtuosism in urbanization, we have to insert this intuition, these best practices, this action, this local project in a strategic plan, in the general policy. I ask you, which is the way for you? Because I had seen a lot of wonderful local and punctual action, but a strategic vision about this question is possible for you?
Okay. Question for everybody, I guess.
Question for you.
So maybe you can start. And...
Okay.
Yeah, okay. 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? Ça marche pas.
Éteins ton micro.
Okay.
Et toi aussi, Massimo.
Ah, excuse me.
D'accord. So, Massimo, that was a question to me? For all, okay. But as it's my turn now? Okay, thank you.
It's Vincent, then the guy up there, I don't remember his
André.
André, and then another André, and religious, and
Okay, thank you. I would like to come back to that point of ecological aspects, which was raised by Colin, and the question of how to communicate about, which was given by François earlier, how to communicate about these aspects. So first, I ask myself, why are we doing research on urban agriculture? I and you, or you more than I probably. And the question which was raised now, the latest question raised by Massimo, brought me again back to that element of why are we doing that research. So for me at least, it is always related to some basic values, I would say, basic values of my profession. I was educated as a landscape planner with a quite broad education up to spatial planning. And my concern is to have or to maintain a sound environment and a good living quality. So this is behind my thoughts. And when I start to talk about others, you, for example, about these elements of urban agriculture, I'm interested in learning of you something which could be adapted to my own place, probably. I could have chosen another approach of my presentation, much more related to the matter which was raised by Massimo, saying, okay, how do these actions relate to planning? And that was something mentioned by Pierre Donadieu, the question of regulation or non-regulation, private, public. I just pointed it out in a way very shortly when I showed the map of Hanover and the greenish dots where all these elements are given, and the last one of the last slides about the Tempelhof field, the old airport of Berlin, where people overtook, in a way, this area. So their concern is a bit that kind of ecological concern and the concern of non-urbanizing everything and non-having a too high density in the less or more inner city of Berlin. And I think you are very right, Colin, to say there are impacts of urbanization into the agricultural landscape, or the countryside, as we can say, which is not only agriculture nowadays. And there is that concern of having green spaces and even productive spaces in the pattern of a city, whatever city it might be, a huge one or a smaller one. And I think one element which is very important is the one which was mentioned by Antonia and Christopher, the risks we face, the risk to lose productive soils, the risk to lose fresh air in the cities, the risk to lose the relationship between our living, our health, and the production of nutrition. So probably the risk factors, the different ones, are the buzzword, in a way, to do that kind of research. So, and coming to your question of understanding each other, I think you already gave the answer yourself, because you said, okay, there is that, there are these legislative conditions, there are the cultural ones, the traditional context, behavior, the système fonctionnaire, I don't know exactly now in English what it is, well, the system of buying and selling surfaces. So the market, in a way, the market-driven forces, and all this have to be discussed. And if we want to learn from each other, we need more, and that's good, the rencontres take place, we need more communication between each other to find out the small differences and to find out, they have a point which might be good to be introduced in our own system. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's the good way to ask questions, putting your answer in your question. That's what I do, you know. That's why there's less risk to be contradicted. So now it's Vincent. Maybe you want to react. Yeah, just ping pong.
Je voudrais juste revenir sur la distinction entre urbain et périurbain, avec un truc très simple, c'est qu'on est quand même sur deux espaces différents. L'un qui est dense, sur lequel on a peu de surface, sur lequel il faut, pour pouvoir faire de l'agriculture commerciale, sur lequel il faut avoir finalement potentiellement une agriculture commerciale, mais qui est avec des rendements différents, et puis un système connu, périurbain ou même un peu plus loin, sur lequel on est sur de l'extensif et des grandes surfaces. Et je reviens juste sur un point pour vous interpeller un petit peu, c'est quand on regarde le background des gens qui veulent produire en ville et non pas à l'extérieur de la ville, on est sur des gens dont le background n'est pas un background agriculteur. Et quand on demande à des agriculteurs de revenir en ville pour faire du maraîchage en bio-intensif ou sur d'autres modèles, ils ne savent pas le faire, tout au moins en France. Et donc là, ma question, c'est, on oppose finalement aujourd'hui deux mondes sur des techniques, sur des rendements, sur des densités, mais cette opposition, elle vient aussi du background et de la formation de ces gens.
Okay.
Ouais, dans la suite, me semble-t-il, de la remarque précédente, moi j'avais une question sur le vocabulaire. Alors, est-ce que c'est une question d'espace ou d'identité? Mais le précédent remarque me fait renvoyer à de l'identité. Il y a un terme qui a été utilisé dans les années, je ne sais plus dire, 70 ou 80 en France, par les sociologues, qui s'appelait le rurbain et le rurbanité. Je me demande s'il ne pourrait pas nous intéresser dans le continuum urbain-rural. Puis j'avais une question pour professeur Briand sur, en tant qu'Européen, c'est là où ça me semble important au plan d'identité, c'est la même question. Il a distingué tout à l'heure l'agriculteur du producteur d'aliments. Et moi, j'aurais voulu en savoir un peu plus parce qu'aujourd'hui, en France, enfin en tout cas pour moi, agronome, je ne fais pas ce distinguo, c'est-à-dire qu'il me semble qu'il y a une assimilation, abusive d'ailleurs, des agriculteurs implicitement qui produisent des aliments, alors que la majorité d'entre eux ne produisent que des matières premières. J'aurais souhaité qu'on puisse préciser cette notion.
Oui, d'accord, mais après, parce qu'il faudra que, voilà, parce que sinon, après, il y en a qui ne vont pas pouvoir parler. Je sais, c'est un peu lourd et je suis un peu dans un rôle de garde-chiourme, c'est pas très agréable. Mais en même temps, si je veux que tout le monde s'exprime, je suis bien obligé d'éviter que ce soit des allers-retours, quoi. Mais peut-être, Christopher, à la fin, après, quand tout le monde aura, tu pourras répondre là-dessus si tu veux. André, ce qui serait bien, c'est qu'il y ait des réactions. Enfin,
Okay, so my question goes back to Massimo's one about strategies for urban agriculture, because I think from our experience, I mean, some planning is necessary if you want to embed it into cities. I mean, if you take London as an example at the moment, it's a developer's paradise, and basically every bit of open space is being lost because density is being used as a shorthand for sustainability. But the question I want to ask is, in Paris, we have this urban agriculture initiative from the mayor, which to me, from the outside, seems to be incredibly advanced, systematic, and comprehensive. And what does everyone here, I mean, to everyone here, but especially, I mean, people from France, how do you view this? Is it as impressive as it appears to be?
Okay, that's typically the kind of question that asks somebody to answer, but I would prefer first to have the other people, you know, that's complicated. We're having 2 or 3 different debates at the same time, so it's very difficult to make it spontaneous because you ask something and somebody wants to answer, but in the meantime, some other people want to speak. So try to, focus on the subject. And the next one there was Colin and Eric first, right?
I just want to answer to Vincent. I can answer in English or in French, both of them. I think we have to mention that, as Evelyn mentioned, we have urban agriculture and urban farming. And more in city, we have farmers. And they are more and more, I say that, they are real farmers. They use innovative aspect, and they are professional. They're more and more professional. And you go to the United States, we have a large farm in the city, and they are farmers, as we have in the rural zone. Perhaps they don't use the same kind of productive system. They're more in hydroponic and so on. No, I just want to mention they are professional.
But back to hydroponic, the guys who are dealing with hydroponics at Lufa Farm and so on and so forth, right? Those guys are not from the agriculture world.
Yeah, not him, but the guys with him, they are 3.
Wow.
So two person are from the farming, are not from the family farmer, but they are farmers. They are working in the West Island.
Agro-scientist rather than farmer.
Yeah. Yes, but most of the new farmer are also. The new farmer, they're not coming from a family that already have a farm. That's the case in Quebec. They are from the university.
I understand what you say, but I was just opposing the fact that the traditional, conventional farmer converted to bio is not the one able. He's to basically make his business on 2, 3, 4, 5 hectares. He can't envisage the fact he would be in a position to work on a rooftop of 1,500 square meter. That's my point. You understand to say that in the agriculture formation, right, training, schools, they don't know how to deal with these aspects, with these technologies.
Yes, and they don't, I'm not sure, right? Most of the information that they give to the farmers are for conventional farm, large, huge conventional farm.
Yes.
And when they go to a small farm, they have problems in urban or rural.
Right.
Which is part of an answer to the question of André before. You were asking how was it in France. It was so marvelous that it looks like to be. Well, just hear what Vincent told you about the people, farmers and bio and so on. It's not that, but Colleen, maybe, don't want to take the floor too long.
So I was going to speak to this point, too, about this idea about the background of people that are producing in cities and what their knowledge base is or is not. But I think this can also go the other way. So for me, when I think about the desires or the motivations of people that want to be food producers, that may have absolutely no relationship to what their family background is. And in fact, the issue becomes this idea of land tenure and availability, both in urban places and in rural places, or those places stuck in between. So there may be people who have land or have access to land that are not interested in being food producers, but they have this land, and then they have to deal with the urbanization pressures. They have to make choices about what kind of management systems they're going to put into place, and if there's incentives for them to keep that land in agriculture, even if they don't want to be doing agriculture or whatever. But there are also lots of people that want to produce food. They want to be a part of this social change that's going on around this relocalization of food, as I was mentioning before, but they don't have access to the places to do them. So I think that's exactly the challenge that we're facing, is how do we connect the people that want to do that kind of production with the spaces to do it, and how do we also help the people that have those spaces to find people to grow food on it, and also make that economically viable for both sides of the equation. How can we facilitate creating the kind of food system that people see that, for a sustainable food system? How are we going to facilitate the capacity of society to do that, given these different parties?
Yeah, so maybe it's time now for, you wanted to answer what André asked you. Just remember me, last question. It was quite interesting about France.
My last question was very simple. was just this policy in Paris to try and integrate urban agriculture, which has got very ambitious targets.
Yeah.
What do people think about it? I mean, from the outside, it's, from what I know about it, it seems very advanced. Yeah.
Well, then maybe can answer that. But look, when you have a target, you may miss the target somewhere, sometimes, you know. For example, Ferme de Galie, it's a private initiative, and it's not exactly in Paris. So you have a lot of big objectives, you know, and we're going to do that and this, and finally, nothing really happens. So, but you have some big experiments in Paris, but not as big as they're sold to the rest of the world, right? So, but maybe he will answer to André. Huh? Ah, he can answer. Okay, answer.
I have an answer for it.
Okay, go ahead. Hein, comment? Appuie sur le micro, voilà.
Oh, sorry. Very getting difficult to follow whose question we're answering here. Now, the difference between agriculteurs and agriculteurs can produce food, they're food producers, but they also produce some of them produce other things, horticulture, horticultural products, which is very much oriented towards the urban market. Food producers, I simply sort of separated that out to include both farmers who produce food production, as well as private gardens, allotment gardens, community gardens, all of these other and the other thing is that within farmers that are producing food production, you also have social organizations. You know, they're not oriented there's an economic or business dimension there, but their main purpose is to produce food products that they sell or give to, or find ways of subsidizing for different segments of the populations that are in need. Okay, and while I'm got the floor for a minute or so, I just like to say that I think the business of eco-services was actually mentioned a number of times, but we didn't have time to go into the different functions. But we already know that around many large cities, most of the pollution of water comes from agriculture, not from industry. I mean, there are some exceptions, obviously, depending on the types of industry. And much of that pollution is related to governments' continued support and encouragement of large-scale, productivist, capitalist agriculture. And so when we talk, and on top of that, in terms of land use planning, in the agricultural reserves in Quebec, in the agricultural zones in Ontario, which is again one of the biggest province in Canada, or the agricultural reserves in British Columbia, it becomes very difficult for small farms. They might be very intensive and produce a lot of income, but it's very difficult for small farms to actually locate in many agricultural reserves or agricultural zones, because the law says, oh, you can't break up a property, because they think that every time you break up a property, it's going to be, it's going to lead to urban development in the countryside, which is nonsense. Okay.
Okay.
So I mean, some of the laws and the rules and regulations are actually stupid.
Okay. Donc,
no, they are. They reflect political appropriation of certain ideas, and that's all they want to do.
So it's within 10 minutes we're going to have our lunch, and I know Eric Duchemin has something to say about, to answer him, and Evelyn Gouchetet wants to say something also, and I heard big disagreement here, they're not okay with that. So, as Christopher was saying, so I propose you 3 interventions, yours first, then you, and then yours. I don't know who reacted, saying that's not right. Who was it?
I think she was agreeing.
You were agreeing. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I heard no. Bravo. Okay. That's, well, better. Okay, so just 2 interventions, and then we'll close the first session and start again at 2:30. And don't worry, on le fera en français. On essaiera de faire fonctionner le système parce que je comprends qu'il y a des gens qui ont là vraiment du mal. Et je suis désolé, on a prévu une traduction simultanée, mais on a un vrai problème avec les casques. Voilà. OK. Vas-y, Eric.
I just want to mention the target of the city of Paris is 30 green rooftop, 30 hectares of green rooftop for urban ag. And you have a lot of issue about that, but one of the issues will be a lot of farm or project initiative spread out all over Paris, and where will be the farmer? The people need for manage a farm. Some of the green rooftop that they plan now is 4 hectares of farm on one place. 4 hectares of a farm for a farm. We need peoples. A lot of peoples. You can't put tractors on the rooftop. So it would be a rooftop of university, Porte de la Chapelle. That's who will be the farmer? That's my question. That's the main issue. After that, we can talk about water, substrate that we need to put in, nutrients, and so on.
Yeah, I think it was what Christopher was saying, we are coming a bit closer to a point to understand each other, because when he talks about that kind of agriculture who is polluting soils and water, that is that kind of intensive agriculture which does not happen within the cities, but in the outskirts. I don't know about the Canadian types of cities, but I wouldn't say that farmers who are integrated in the world market of farming, they do not really care about small dots within inner cities to have some nice products there. So these are totally different groups, I presume, and if we want to compare, we have to make that differences and deciding upon whether we are talking about that kind of intensive farming, which is a totally different element in my eyes, or that kind of urban agriculture, which is, I would even say from the viewpoint of at least European farmer, a tiny little thing to play with.
Ok, thank you. Merci, Evelyne. Pas de regret. Quelqu'un veut dire quelque chose? Somebody want... Oh, yeah, you were the first and the last. Great.
On a le temps, en français.
En français.
On a le temps, c'est pour répondre à André, mais plutôt en dehors de la ville, donc en région Île-de-France. En fait, en France, nous, on a beaucoup plus privilégié la réglementation. C'est les documents d'urbanisme, paradoxalement, qui sont censés protéger les terrains agricoles. Ce qui, et bien évidemment, ne marche pas ou n'a assez peu marché, puisqu'ils sont appliqués à un niveau communal et les exemples en fait de réelle régulation de l'agriculture, et ça Pierre Donadieu l'a évoqué, c'est à travers des politiques beaucoup plus actives d'acquisition foncière en fait, ou de protection de zones agricoles actées comme particulière. La plaine de Versailles, elle a été protégée pour ses valeurs agricoles, mais aussi pour ses valeurs paysagères. Donc on a ce type de protection, mais qui, bien évidemment, vont marcher que dans certains endroits, où l'Agence des espaces verts, qui acquiert un certain nombre de terrains, mais dont les financements sont forcément limités. Donc on a des outils, mais ces outils-là vont s'appliquer dans des périmètres d'exception ou sur des territoires où il y a des systèmes de régulation ou de gouvernance qui vont permettre cette protection. Mais dans bon nombre de cas, dès qu'on a besoin de terrains à urbaniser, on les prend sur les terres agricoles. Et les agriculteurs eux-mêmes, quand l'âge de la retraite arrive, bien évidemment pas autour de Reims, parce qu'au prix du foncier viticole, même céréalier, on a une certaine pérennité, mais les agriculteurs vendent eux-mêmes leurs terrains pour la construction. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est qu'autour de Reims, les vrais détenteurs du foncier, ce sont les agriculteurs. Il n'y a pas d'agence foncière, ils ne sont jamais arrivés à en faire une, et c'est l'agriculture qui défend son foncier. Mais une agriculture à forte valeur ajoutée, ce qui n'est quand même pas le cas dans bon nombre d'endroits, et ce qui n'est pas le cas notamment autour de Paris.
Ok, merci Sylvie pour cette intervention qui a donné tous les éléments. C'est une manière bien détaillée d'expliquer pourquoi c'est pas parce qu'on a une cible qu'on atteint la cible, en l'occurrence. Je vous donne à tous rendez-vous à 2h30 pour la suite des réjouissances. C'est